In my entire life, I have never loved anyone like I love Alicia. She is the only muse in every note I write, the melody that flows in every composition, the one true inspiration. Every time I look into her eyes, it feels as though I am living in a beautiful opera, where every moment is sweet and full of hope. Alicia, she is everything to me. I am Aurelian Blackwood, a composer, an artist with a soul full of passion. Ever since I was young, I realized that music was the only thing I could dedicate my life to. Unlike other musicians, music for me has never been just a tool to make a living. It is the language of my heart, the way I express my emotions, thoughts, and beliefs. But not all of my works have been created in peace. My music has always carried a hint of sadness because I've always felt like something important was missing. Then Alicia came into my life, like a cool breeze on a scorching summer day. Since then, my music has no longer been just sadness. She became the person I wanted to write for, the one I wanted to dedicate everything to in each melody. Every time I played the piano, every time I composed a new piece, I thought of her. Alicia Hawke, a name both gentle and strong. A woman who could change the world with nothing more than her presence. I didn't love her just for her outer beauty, but for the beauty within, a beauty that cannot be explained in words. She was a blend of pride and gentleness, strength and tenderness. She had a way of making everything come alive, whether it was just a glance, a fleeting look, or a soft smile. She was the passion in my heart, the reason I kept creating. The first days we spent together, I never felt alone. I composed and she was always the first to listen, the only one to give feedback. She taught me not just about music but also about life, about love. Every piece I wrote had a little piece of her in it. Alicia's Lullaby, the piece I composed for her one autumn afternoon as we sat by the window watching the leaves fall, was the clearest testament to the love in every note. She always said my music could change the world, and I believed her. But in my heart, I couldn't help but wonder, was my music truly enough to keep her by my side forever? Beside me, there was always Lucian Storm, my closest friend. We had known each other since university and had been inseparable ever since. Lucian was talented, deeply knowledgeable about music, and also one of the only people I trusted to give advice on my unfinished pieces. Whenever I hit a wall with my compositions, Lucian was the first person I turned to. He wasn't just a friend, he was a companion, someone who shared in my passions and my worries about music. Lucian was always humble, helping me without ever asking for anything in return. He would often visit Alicia and me in the afternoons when I needed a fresh perspective on my works. Our relationship with Lucian was strong, and there was nothing that could come between us. But I didn't realize that, in the moments when I trusted Lucian the most, darkness was quietly creeping into our lives. I began to notice small changes in the relationship between Alicia and me. She was no longer as supportive of my compositions, no longer admiring the melodies I wrote. She started to distance herself. Instead of coming to listen to me play, she became busy with social engagements, private meetings she never mentioned. Lucian, too, stopped visiting me as often. The feeling that I could rely on him for feedback began to fade. I kept asking myself, could he just be too busy? But I couldn't explain the sense of unease building inside me. While I continued to immerse myself in my work, something mysterious was happening, and I didn't know it. The more I tried to focus on my music, the more I realized that something was wrong. Alicia's absence was becoming too pronounced. I could feel it in the way she no longer sought out my company, in the way she avoided my gaze when I played for her. The melodies that had once seemed so full of life and love now echoed emptily in the silence between us. I was consumed by my work, yes, but this was different. Alicia had always been the driving force behind my music. Her smile, her laughter, the sound of her voice were the heartbeats that pulsed through each note I composed. But now, those beats had grown faint. I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway, and for a moment, my heart would race, only to fall still when she passed by without a word, her attention elsewhere. It was a hollow feeling, and the longer it went on, the more I could sense something was amiss. Lucian noticed the change too. He always did, even when I tried to push it down. As my closest friend, he was the first to ask if everything was all right. But I could see it in his eyes, he knew. "You seem distant," Lucian said one evening, sitting beside me in my studio. "Your music, it doesn't have the same fire it used to." I looked at him, unable to hide my frustration. "I'm just distracted, that's all. Nothing to worry about." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was too much at stake, my work, my love, my world, and all of it seemed to be unraveling. Alicia had grown more distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. Worse still, I wasn't sure what I could do to stop it. Lucian, ever perceptive, offered his usual solution, something to clear my head, something to ease the tension. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. Maybe you need a break. Let's get out of here for a bit. Go somewhere quiet, a little retreat. Focus on what really matters." I had thought about it for a while, but what was I supposed to escape from? The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to face it. Not yet. A few days passed before I truly understood what had been bothering me. I was walking back to my study after a late dinner, when I overheard something, a fragment of a conversation, but it was enough to make everything fall into place. "Alicia," Lucian said, his voice lower than usual, but still carrying clearly through the thick wood of the door. "You have to tell him." My breath caught in my chest as I leaned in closer, straining to hear. "I don't know if I can." "He'll never forgive me," Alicia's voice replied, soft but tinged with guilt. There was a long pause. Lucian's voice returned, calm, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "He deserves to know the truth. You can't keep hiding it, Alicia. It's only going to hurt him more." At that moment, the world seemed to stop. My hands gripped the doorframe, and my heart pounded painfully in my chest. The silence that followed seemed deafening. I don't remember walking away. I just know that when I did, I felt the floor fall away beneath me, as if the earth itself had decided it could no longer hold me up. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. The music, once a refuge, felt like an empty echo. I didn't want to look at Alicia. Didn't want to hear her excuses or pretend that everything was fine. How could I? The truth was slowly sinking in. Lucian, my best friend, the one person I trusted with everything, had been keeping secrets from me. And worse still, Alicia, the woman I had loved and believed in, had betrayed me. I had never known what true betrayal felt like until now. The weight of the realization was crushing. The woman I had sacrificed everything for, the woman who had been the muse of my greatest works, had been lying to me all along. But I couldn't bring myself to confront them, not yet. The tension between Alicia and me was palpable. It was as if the air itself had thickened, each breath a struggle. She would speak to me in passing, but her eyes avoided mine, and her words felt like distant echoes. I had become a stranger to her. And she, to me. One evening, when I was seated at the piano, trying in vain to find the right melody, Alicia came into the room. I didn't look up at first, afraid that if I did, the truth would come pouring out in ways I wouldn't be able to. "Stop. Aurelian." Her voice was soft, tentative. "Can we talk?" I looked at her then, my hands frozen above the keys. I didn't know what I expected to see in her eyes, but I knew I wasn't going to like it. "About what?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She flinched, but I didn't care. I didn't want to hear any more lies. She took a step forward, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. I've been keeping something from you." I couldn't look at her any longer. "I already know." Her breath caught, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. The weight of the silence between us was unbearable. I stood up and walked past her, refusing to meet her eyes. I don't need to hear your excuses. I don't need you to tell me why it happened. I don't want to know. Alicia, I stopped myself before I could say anything more. What was there left to say? But she wouldn't let me walk away. Aurelian, please, I turned to her then, my heart breaking into pieces. No, Alicia. You don't get to ask for forgiveness now. Not after everything. Days passed, but the heavy silence between Alicia and me remained. It was like living in a house that had been abandoned by everything but memories. Each room echoed with a past I wasn't ready to face. I couldn't escape the image of Lucian's face, so cold and calculating, when he'd spoken to Alicia. I couldn't erase the sound of her voice, whispering her regrets to him, knowing that it was my trust they were betraying. I should have confronted them both immediately, but the pain, the shock, left me frozen. What could I say? How could I look at the woman I had loved so deeply, the one I thought was my heart and soul, and hear her tell me the truth? I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to handle it. I spent hours in the studio, pouring myself into music that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I wrote, but the words didn't make sense. I composed, but the notes felt hollow. Nothing had the same meaning anymore. It was as if my very soul had been drained out of the melodies I once believed were the soundtrack of my life. The worst part? Alicia wasn't even trying to fix it. She wasn't reaching out anymore, as if she had given up too. It was as if she expected me to come to her, to offer forgiveness as though everything were normal. But how could I? One evening, I couldn't stand it any longer. I grabbed my coat, slamming the door behind me as I left the house. The night air was cold, but it didn't matter. I needed to clear my head, even if only for a little while. I found myself walking the streets aimlessly, trying to escape the suffocating reality of my life. The lights of the city blurred around me, the sounds of the world spinning in a cacophony I no longer recognized. How had it all come to this? I reached a familiar bar, one I used to frequent when I needed to unwind. It was quiet, almost empty, and I took a seat at the bar, ordering something strong to drown my thoughts. I needed to escape, if only for a little while. As I nursed the drink, my mind kept drifting back to the conversation I'd overheard. Lucian. Alicia. They had betrayed me, but why? What had driven them to this? I couldn't believe it was just a moment of weakness. They had been in this together for longer than I realized, and that made everything hurt more. I didn't notice the figure beside me until he spoke. Aurelian. I turned to see Lucian, standing there with his usual confident, charming smile. But today, it felt more forced than ever. What are you doing here? I asked coldly, turning my attention back to my drink. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I came to talk, Lucian said, sliding into the seat beside me. About everything. About you, Alicia, and us. I didn't say anything, staring ahead. What could he possibly say to make this right? I never meant for any of this to happen, you know that, right? Lucian continued, his voice low. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I scoffed, the bitterness rising in my chest. Is that supposed to make it better? That it wasn't planned? That it just happened? I never wanted to hurt you, Lucian said quietly, his gaze softening. But the truth is, I've been in love with Alicia for years. I couldn't help it. My heart sank. Those words, in love with Alicia, struck me like a slap to the face. Lucian wasn't just some bystander in this mess. He had been an active participant, an accomplice in the betrayal of the one person who trusted him most. You've been lying to me this whole time, haven't you? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I never wanted to hurt you, Aurelian, Lucian repeated, his voice breaking slightly. But I couldn't stand watching you be so consumed by your work, by your music, when Alicia was right there, right in front of me, needing someone to love her. You think you loved her more than I did? I shot back, my fist clenched at my side. You think you knew her better than I did? Lucian was silent for a moment, and for a brief instant, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a familiar, calculated mask. I don't expect you to understand, he said, his tone defensive. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I had to tell you, Aurelian. You deserve to know the truth. I couldn't look at him anymore. The truth was something I didn't want to hear, something I couldn't bear to accept. My entire world was falling apart, and Lucian, my oldest friend, was the one holding the wrecking ball. I don't know how I'm supposed to process any of this, I muttered, feeling numb. I understand, Lucian said softly. But if you ever want to talk about it, you know where to find me. I didn't respond. He left me there, sitting in the darkened corner of the bar, the weight of his words heavy in the air. When I returned home, it was late. The house was dark, and Alicia was nowhere to be found. I wandered through the halls, feeling like a ghost in my own life, until I reached the study. There, on the piano, was a piece of sheet music. The title of the piece sent a chill down my spine, The Unspoken Truth. I couldn't believe it. She had written it. I slowly unfolded the pages, the music hauntingly beautiful, but it was laced with sorrow, an expression of everything we had lost, everything I had lost. As I played the first few notes, I realized it wasn't just a song, it was a confession. Alicia had been writing this all along, an attempt to tell me what had been hidden, to express the guilt and the longing she hadn't been able to say. The music was as much a part of her as it was of me, and in that moment, I realized that the words between us weren't enough. The music had always spoken louder, and now it was the only way she knew how to apologize. I played the entire piece, the sorrow and the music matching the ache in my heart. And by the time the final note echoed through the room, I knew one thing for sure, the truth was more painful than I could have ever imagined, and yet, I was still left with a question. What do I do now? The days after the night with Lucian felt like I was walking through a fog. The truth had crashed down upon me like a storm, and no matter how much I tried to push it away, it remained, suffocating every thought, every breath. Alicia's absence became more pronounced, yet it wasn't the silence between us that was the most painful, it was the haunting knowledge that she had chosen him. That she had fallen in love with someone else, someone who had always been there by my side. It was a betrayal too deep to put into words, and I had no idea how to process it. I spent my nights playing the piano, trying to find solace in the melodies that used to bring me peace. But now, each note I played felt like a reminder of what I had lost. The music that had once been so full of hope and inspiration now felt like a mournful requiem. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alicia's face. But it was different now. It wasn't the face of the woman I loved. It was the face of someone I didn't recognize, someone who had deceived me. And Lucian. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him anymore. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of the countless times he had stood by my side, all the while hiding the truth from me. My trust, my friendship, it all seemed like a lie now. One evening, I could no longer sit in silence. The weight of everything, my music, my love, my betrayal, had become too much to bear. I needed answers, closure, something. I grabbed my coat and left the house, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I found myself standing in front of Alicia's apartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared up at the window where I had once stood, holding her hand as we watched the sun set together. The memories felt distant now, like a dream I couldn't quite grasp. I didn't know what I was expecting. I didn't know if I wanted to see her at all. But I knew I needed to hear it from her. I needed to understand why. I rang the bell, my heart racing, and waited. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Alicia, standing in the doorway, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw Me. She looked different, fragile, like the weight of everything was finally starting to show. Aurelian, she whispered, her voice breaking. I stood there, unable to speak at first. I wanted to yell, to scream at her, but the words wouldn't come. I had so many questions, but they all seemed to choke me. Finally, I managed to say, why? Why did you do it, Alicia? Her face softened, and for the briefest moment, I saw the woman I once knew, the woman I had loved. She stepped aside, wordlessly inviting me in. I hesitated for a moment before stepping across the threshold, the warmth of the apartment now feeling like a cage. We sat down on the couch, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Alicia looked down, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. I didn't want to hurt you, Aurelian, she said quietly, her voice so low I could barely hear it. I never meant for any of this to happen. Then why? I asked, my voice trembling with frustration. Why did you do it? Why did you choose him, Alicia? She closed her eyes for a moment, as though bracing herself for the truth. I've loved you for so long, Aurelian. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel lost. I started to feel like I was living in your shadow. I couldn't reach you. I couldn't connect with you the way I wanted to. I stared at her, disbelief crawling up my spine. You think that's why you went to him? I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and bitterness. Lucian? My best friend? Did you honestly think he was the answer? She winced, and her voice faltered. No. I never thought it would go this far. But Lucian, he was always there for me, Aurelian. He listened to me when you didn't. He understood me when you were too lost in your work to even notice. I didn't mean for it to happen, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with him. I felt my chest tighten as her words settled into the space between us. She had loved him. She had given herself to him in ways she had never given to me. And I had trusted both of them. Do you love him? I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flickered away, and I could see the pain in her face. Finally, she nodded, her voice a whisper. Yes. I do. It was as though the ground beneath me had shifted. Everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, had been a lie. The woman I had given everything to, the one who had been my muse, had betrayed me with the one person I had trusted the most. My world felt like it was crumbling around me, piece by piece. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly, standing up. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. Alicia stood as well, her eyes filled with regret. Aurelian, please, don't go. Please let me explain. We can fix this. I shook my head, unable to look at her anymore. No, Alicia. You've already made your choice. I walked out of her apartment without looking back, each step carrying me further away from the life I had once known. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on my work, couldn't find the motivation to write. The music that had once been my refuge now felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. But there was one thing I knew for sure, I had to leave. I had to get away from this place, from the memories, from the people who had broken me. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and isolation. I couldn't bring myself to look at the city, to hear the familiar sounds of the streets, or even glance at the place I once called home. Alicia's face was permanently etched in my mind, a reminder of everything I had lost. Lucian, my oldest friend, had taken away my trust, my love, and my sense of belonging. And as much as I wanted to escape from the pain, it lingered, a constant ache gnawing at me from within. I left the city, not knowing where I was headed, just needing to be somewhere far away from all of it. The world outside seemed foreign now, as though I was stepping into a new life that didn't belong to me. I found myself in a quiet coastal town, far from the noise and chaos of my past. I rented a small cottage, a modest place with views of the sea that stretched endlessly to the horizon. The air was different here, crisp and salty, the kind of air that filled your lungs with possibility. But no matter how far I traveled, the weight of betrayal still pressed against me, a constant reminder that the life I had known was forever changed. I spent my days walking along the shore, collecting shells and rocks, trying to find a sense of peace that had long eluded me. The music that had once defined me no longer held its magic. I couldn't sit at the piano anymore without feeling the sting of Alicia's betrayal. It was as though the keys themselves were mocking me, each note a painful echo of the love I had given, the trust one had placed in them both. But the quiet of the coast, the endless waves crashing against the shore, eventually began to soothe me. The rhythm of the ocean mirrored the rhythm of my heart, and in the space between each wave, I began to find fragments of peace. It was a slow process, but slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I started to compose again, but it was different. The music was darker, more introspective. It no longer spoke of the love I had once felt, but of loss, of shattered dreams. Each note was a way of confronting the past, of accepting the pain that I had been trying to outrun. It wasn't the music I had once envisioned, but it was my truth now. One evening, while walking along the beach, I came across a small, weathered shipwreck. It had clearly been abandoned for years, its hull cracked and covered in barnacles. For some reason, the sight of it filled me with a strange sense of understanding. The ship had once sailed, once carried people from place to place, but now it was nothing more than a forgotten relic of the past. I stood there, staring at it for a long while, before the thought struck me, I was like that ship. Once full of promise, once full of direction, but now stranded, broken by the winds of betrayal. But just as the ship had weathered storms, perhaps there was still a way to rebuild. I spent the following weeks on the beach every day, coming to terms with the fact that nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't go back to the person I had been before, the person who had trusted, loved, and created without question. That part of me was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the harshest of truths, that love is fragile, and trust is even more so. But amidst the wreckage of my past, I found something that I hadn't expected, a sense of clarity. The music, the love, the betrayal, they had shaped me, but they didn't define me. It was my choice now what I would do with the broken pieces. It was around that time that I received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Alicia. My heart skipped a beat as I held the envelope in my hands. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, and I hadn't expected to hear from her again. Part of me wanted to tear the letter up and forget about everything, but another part of me, a part one couldn't deny, wanted to know what she had to say. I opened the letter slowly, my fingers trembling slightly as I read her words. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I don't even know why I'm writing this letter. Maybe it's because I can't live with myself knowing that I've destroyed everything between us, knowing that I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I was selfish, Aurelian. I thought I could have everything, your love, your devotion, and Lucian's friendship. But in the end, I ended up losing it all. I lost you, and I lost myself in the process. I miss you, more than you can ever know. I've tried to move on, but the truth is, I don't know how. I can't escape the fact that I betrayed you, and every day, it feels like I'm drowning in regret. I never meant for it to happen like this, and I can't fix what's broken. But I want you to know that I've learned my lesson. I've learned that love is not something to be taken for granted, that trust is sacred, and that the person who was always there for me, who loved me unconditionally, was you. I'm sorry, Aurelian. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I don't expect anything from you. But I needed to say this, because I don't know how to move forward without facing the consequences of my actions. I hope you find peace, no matter where you are, and that one day, you'll be able to forgive me, even if it's not today. The letter fell from my hands, and I stared at the ground for a long while. Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. She was sorry. She understood now what she had done. But that didn't change what had happened. The betrayal was still there, buried deep inside me, a wound that would never fully heal. Yet, as I stood there on the edge of the shore, I felt something stir within me, something I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of letting go. Perhaps the music would never be the same again, and perhaps my heart would always carry the scars of what had happened. But I realized that I had the power to choose my own path now. The past couldn't be erased, but the future was still mine to shape. I looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the music I would create from here on out wouldn't be the same as before, but it would be mine. And maybe, just maybe, I could still find a way to heal. The weight of betrayal might never fully leave me, but the future held the possibility of redemption. Not for Alicia, not for Lucian, but for me. And in the end, that was what mattered most.